Can everyone hear us okay? Hi, Peter. Hi, Pinky. Hi, Susan. Can you hear us? Yes, okay.
Great.
We'll give it just another minute to see if there's any other folks that join. And then whenever you're ready.
Okay,
Joel.
give them another minute. Sounds good. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started then. So welcome everyone. Thank you very much for volunteering your time on a Saturday to do the 2022 election protection poll monitor training. My name is Jill Green. I am the senior community organizer and the EP program manager at Common Cause PA. So as we get started, we just have a few housekeeping things to note. Please type all of your questions into the Q&A section, and that way we can kind of keep a track of them. Keep your questions relevant to the current section because many of your questions may be answered as the training progresses. If you have any trouble seeing the presentation or hearing me, please direct message Scott and he'll help you out. And just as a reminder, all participants will receive these slides along with additional materials to review before Election Day. So today's training will cover an overview of the election protection program, your roles and responsibilities as a poll monitor. We'll go over some of the most frequently asked questions in Pennsylvania and review some common scenarios, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So these are today's training goals. You should leave this training knowing the structure and purpose of the election protection program, how you fit in and how you'll be helping voters on election day, how to answer those commonly asked questions, how to escalate the bigger problems, and how to notify the command center about systemic issues arising at the polls, and who to contact when you have a problem or question on election day. So there are some basic terms that you should know as we move along. There could be some confusion as to what the difference between a poll monitor and a poll worker. So to clarify, election protection is the nonpartisan poll monitor program that you're volunteering with. We are the largest nonpartisan voter protection effort in the country. Poll monitors are you. You are training to be a poll monitor who answers voter questions and escalates bigger problems. We have traditional in-person poll monitors and roving poll monitors, and each of those have a valuable role in the EP program on election day. Poll workers are the people who are hired by the county election offices to run the elections and help the voters inside. The command center is your local contact for resolving issues and troubleshooting. The command center coordinates the response, takes the escalated tickets and evaluates them to see what needs a further response or may need a legal team to head out to a polling place to solve a problem in person. You have the EP hotlines. The 866 Our Vote hotline is the main resource for voters to help them resolve issues and answer questions, but we have other in-language hotlines that we'll talk about shortly. And then we have poll watchers, and these are typically hired by the parties or they volunteer for the parties, and they are the folks who are inside the polling place observing the check-in process, and those folks need to have a certificate to be inside the polling place. So just real briefly, I'm going to go over the election landscape in Pennsylvania, some things we we will be watching out for that may have an effect on how election day is conducted. So this year we are preparing for 2 highly contested races. We have the Senate race and the gubernatorial race, the governor's race, as well as all of the races for congressional seats, all of the state house seats, and half of the state Senate seats. This is also going to be the first election with new congressional and legislative district maps. So that is definitely something that we will need to be mindful of. But we also have to be aware of the continued disinformation that's being spread about the 2020 election and those efforts to erode our democratic norms. So regardless of what's going on around us, every year voters experience all sorts of issues when they try to vote. It's a complicated process, and in an effort to make sure that everybody is able to cast their vote, we have a lot of things that we watch out for. Voter registration is at an all-time high, so there's an even greater risk that voters will run into an obstacle when they show up at the polls. The bigger problems that we have seen most recently was confusion about vote by mail because it was a new system in 2020. Poll workers and voters were confused about how voters could surrender a mail ballot and vote in person, or what the deadlines were. With the COVID issue, there was a lot of confusion around that. We expect to see that a little less, but especially with the contention around Act 77, which is what gave us vote by mail, we may experience a lot of questions about that. Typically, one of the bigger problems we have is long lines at the polling places, especially in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. We have seen voting machine malfunctions. Even though we got new voting machines in 2019, they still break down. We still have issues where poll workers aren't sure how to operate them. We have scanners that jam, all sorts of things. We're concerned this year about ballot shortages, especially since the supply chain issues may be disruptive and may make it difficult for counties to get the paper they need for those ballots. And then increasingly, we're seeing language access issues, and we'll talk a bit more about this later, but basically this is folks who primarily speak a language other than English. They are permitted to have a translator in their polling place, but not all poll workers know that, so they can run into some issues being allowed to have someone with them. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So the Election Protection Coalition runs the EP program in order to combat these issues and make sure every voter has a chance to cast their vote. So to give a little perspective on how the Election Protection Program has grown, in 2010, the entire program nationwide, all year in 2010, received just over 20,000 calls. In 2020 alone, Pennsylvania, just between September 1st and November 3rd, received almost 28,000 calls. So in that 10-year span, our program has expanded exponentially as voters are more aware of this resource, and as things change, new laws are put into place, new equipment is purchased by the counties. So in the 2020 general election, we deployed over 500 poll monitors, both rovers and in person, to 37 counties throughout the Commonwealth. So the EP program started in 2002 as a response to the Florida hanging Chad debacle. I don't know how many of you folks remember that, but there was a big problem with punch card ballots, and there's a lot of contention around the results of that election. And as a result, the Help America Vote Act was implemented, and this had new requirements for elections, including eliminating those punch card ballots and the poll lever voting machines. But this created a lot of confusion with voters. So the EP program and its signature voter assistance hotline was developed to ensure all voters can successfully cast their votes. So the EP Coalition is the largest nonpartisan voter protection coalition in the country. And by nonpartisan, I mean we do not support, endorse, or oppose candidates, parties, or campaigns. We do not engage in any electioneering. Our role is solely to help voters cast their votes. Nationally, the EP Coalition is made up of 100 local, state, and national groups, and they're led by Common Cause, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under the Law, the ACLU, and State Voices. But the most important link in this chain is the thousands of dedicated volunteers working at call centers and at polling places. So in Pennsylvania at the state level, Common Cause PA leads the field program, which is what this is. The Lawyers Committee provides and staffs the hotline. The ACLU of Pennsylvania recruits and trains legal volunteers to assist voters. And Pennsylvania Voice organizes the grassroots efforts to educate voters about their rights and get out the vote, particularly in marginalized communities. So how do we do what we do? We learn about voting problems in two ways. We take direct calls to the hotline from voters or poll monitors, and occasionally we get them from poll workers. And those calls are answered by volunteers who are trained to evaluate and assess the calls and elevate them to the command center if necessary. We also learn about incidents through the mobile incident reporting form called JotForm. If you volunteered with us in 2020, you may remember JotForm, but if you don't, it's a sophisticated version of Google Forms. It's a really handy tool that can help you take a lot of incident reports and report them quickly to the command center. So you as a poll monitor will report these conditions you observe using JotForm, and we'll have more on that later. And the responses from the command center may range from, calling a poll monitor and directing them on what to do, or they may call the county to alert them to a problem and assist with responding to that problem, or they may deploy lawyers to respond to issues requiring a legal response up to and including litigation. So for example, a poll monitor may arrive for their 7 a.m. shift and see that the polling place is not open. They'll report it through JotForm, but then the polling place opens at 7:30. So the command center will follow up with the poll monitor, but likely won't take any further action unless there are voters who are unable to cast their vote because the polling place opened late. So we'll note this incident, and then later we'll follow up with the county to see if steps can be taken to make sure this polling place doesn't open late again. So as I mentioned at the top, there are several hotlines. The one we primarily work with is the 866-hour vote, but Pennsylvania is growing in diversity every year. We have several local jurisdictions that are required by federal law to provide assistance in languages other than English. So in Berks County, Lehigh County, and Philadelphia County, they're required to provide assistance in Spanish. And also Philly is for the first time this year required to provide assistance in Chinese. But there are other communities throughout the Commonwealth with folks who speak languages other than English primarily, and they aren't covered by this federal law provision, and they still need assistance. So one way we provide this is through partnering with in-language hotlines run by allied organizations. So again, we have the 866-hour vote hotline. That is the English language hotline that we primarily work with, and this is provided by the Lawyers Committee. There's the 888 Ve y Vota bilingual Spanish and English hotline provided by NALEO Educational Fund. And these two hotlines are currently live Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And if voters call, like during the weekend, there is voicemail, and then they'll call them back on the next business day. There's also the 888 API Vote Asian language hotline that provides assistance in 8 languages: Chinese, Cantonese, Vietnamese, Korean, Tagalog, Urdu, Hindu, and Bengali. And this is provided by Asian Americans Advancing Justice and API PA Vote. And then there is the bilingual Arabic English hotline 844 YALA US, provided by the Arab American Institute. And these two, the Asian language and Arabic language hotlines, are currently available by voicemail and next day callback, and they will go live closer to the election. So I think we can pause now for any questions.
I will just unmute folks. If anybody has any questions, feel free to speak up.
Hi, everyone. So far, I have no questions right now.
Thanks, Peter. Margaret, Peter, or Susan, if you unmute, if you'd like to unmute and ask any questions if you have them. If not, we can go on.
Okay, sounds good. All right. So moving ahead. So now we're going to talk about the different ways in which you volunteer and what you can expect on election day. There are several different volunteer opportunities within the election protection program, and this training outlines our field programs, which is the in-person poll monitoring and the rover poll monitoring. So the first way is our traditional in-person poll monitor. We will assign you to polling places in your communities. You'll stand outside the polling place answering questions from voters, observing conditions, reporting those conditions through the incident reporting system, JotForm. And then the rovers will travel to several polling places. We began this program in 2020 in response to the COVID-19 crisis. In the 2020 June primary, we only used rovers as a way to maintain social distancing. So we assigned poll monitors to travel between 4 to 6 polling places in their area, post the 866 Our Vote yard signs, observe conditions from their cars, and of course, report anything of note to the command center. We are providing this pathway again. If you don't want to be a rover, you don't have to be a rover. You could just be an in-person poll monitor. But the rovers will generally be assigned to polling places without in-person poll monitors so that we can get better coverage. But you can also interact face-to-face with voters as necessary as a rover. If you see problems and you want to get out and talk to voters, you can do that too. But that is totally optional. And then we also have another part of the program, which are our digital monitors. We're not training for that today, but I did want to bring it up in case you wanted to also train for this. They are trained through the National Civic Listening Corps program, and they monitor social media before, during, and after Election Day for reports of dis and misinformation about the election. This was very helpful in 2020 when people were on social media posting the wrong election dates or telling people that, if you show up to vote, they're going to ask you for ID. There's just a lot of disinformation around, and it was very helpful for us to have folks monitoring that and reporting it to our disinformation hotline. They also look for reports of problems at the polls, so they'll monitor county social media sites. They'll look for individuals reporting on lines or harassment or intimidation. So, of course, at any time, if you see anything strange or anything you think is wrong, you can always call the hotline. But if you're interested in training as a digital monitor, we do have a sign up for that. And if you want that, I can send that out with the follow-up materials. So whether you're an in-person, roving, or digital monitor, you have several goals on election day. And the first and primary goal is to assist voters. Our goal is to ensure every voter is able to cast their vote and have their vote counted. But we also gather data so that we can track problems, flag issues, and make policy and legislation recommendations. And this helps us also better prepare for future elections so that we can help more voters. We're also there to raise awareness about voting rights and ensure that people know how to protect their rights. And ultimately, we're there to do this work to protect democracy. A healthy democratic society respects everyone's right to have their voice heard, and we are there to make sure that that happens. So your polling place assignment will be based on what type of monitor you've chosen to be, in-person, roving. You won't be a polling place for digital. But it's based on the needs of the area where you are and your availability. You will generally serve 1 2 to 3 hour shift in a single polling place. Though there have been occasions where we've asked to reassign poll monitors because something was happening at a place that didn't have a poll monitor. That's totally optional. If somebody calls you and asks you if you want to go to a different polling place, you are free to say no. That is absolutely fine. we do our best to get polling place assignments as soon as possible, but we can't have the finalized polling place assignments until we receive the final polling place locations from the county. So we just ask for a little patience. We know as we get closer to the election, people will be wondering where they're going to be stationed. We are actually going to be using a Sign Up Genius tool that we worked with, that we developed with Sign Up Genius, that will allow you to self-select your polling place location and shift. They are first come, first serve, but generally you will be in charge of where and when you serve. And you, of course, you can sign up for more than one shift if you want. But again, we don't have that ready yet because we have not gotten the polling place locations from the counties yet. We are working on those. We are hoping to have them within the next 2 weeks. So roving monitors will be assigned to several polling places. You can drive around, or if you bike around a lot, you can do that too. And you'll just assess potential issues to report to the command center. It's best to visit these locations during peak voting hours. So this would be, earlier in the day, and then after the work day ends. Those are going to be your peak hours to take a look at what's going on. We have a few magnetic signs. If you have a car and you want to put a magnetic sign on your car to let people know who you are, and you don't, seem like you're just stalking a polling place. So if you want those, when you tell me which kind of poll monitor you want to be, let me know. So you'll have less interaction directly with voters, but you still may need to get out and answer some questions, or talk to a poll monitor. And with the unsureties of the COVID-19 issue, it is entirely up to you how you want to handle that. If you're not comfortable talking to people, or you see a lot of people not wearing masks and you prefer not to talk to people not wearing masks, it is okay to not get out and interact with people. That is absolutely fine. And again, if you're an in-person monitor and you want, PPE, if you want a mask and everything, that is absolutely fine. Your safety is our primary concern with us. So some tips: you want to be proactive and observant, but you also want to be friendly and approachable. You want to provide proactive support to voters. Just smile and a friendly greeting can get you a long way with voters. You can approach them as they enter or exit the polling place. You don't want to necessarily approach them as they're in line, because that is considered a protected area. That is the electioneering zone. So you want to stay about 10 feet away from the line to get into the polling place, if there is one. But as a voter's coming out, you can approach them and say, "Hi, my name's Jill. I'm a nonpartisan election protection volunteer. Did you have any questions while you were voting today? Did you have any problems?" That sort of thing. So, for example, you want to look for people who are, maybe visibly frustrated or look confused. They may not be in the right polling place. So yeah, just give them a friendly face. We want election day to be a joyful experience. So if somebody's having trouble, it can be very helpful to have a friendly face to help them through it. And also, if you are fluent in a language other than English, you may also want to consider making a button or a sign that says what languages you can converse in, so that you can direct voters to one of the other language hotspots. So in terms of reporting the issues, we have our field reporting structure. We have a polling place checklist, which is something you will do as soon as you get to your polling place. You will look for things like long lines, lack of signage, lack of access for disabled voters. You'll also have a tally sheet. You'll use that when you are answering questions. If you get 5 voters who want to look up where their polling place is, you would want to note that on the tally sheet. The tally sheet is for questions that you're able to answer without escalating to the hotlines or the command center. And then when you have problems that you can't resolve or you need to escalate, you would use the JOT form, reporting form, or you would suggest that the voter contact the hotline. So we'll have a little training on how to use the JOT form. You can also call your local command center or state lead. That would be me. We're still working on getting a phone number set up for that, so that will be sent out with your packet. And then, of course, any voting related questions, direct them to the hotline if that's the easiest way for them. So while you'll always be able to record and report back your field data with a paper form if you choose to, the mobile version of our field reporting form helps us to get information much faster and help more voters on election day. The forms tend to take a while to process, so we really encourage folks to use JotForm. This allows you the same functionality we've used in the past, the tally sheets, the polling place checklist, and the incident reports. But the difference with the JotForm is the command center will be able to immediately see your report come in and flag and follow up without having to wait until the end of your shift for you to send your paper forms in. So to use the digital reporting form, you can download the JotForm app or just use the web page link. You don't have to, you know, if you're like me and you have a lot of apps on your phone and don't really have room for any more, you don't have to download the app. You can just go right to the web page link and all of that will be sent to you. But the app is useful because it has a kiosk mode where basically you can take a report, send it away, and it brings the form right back up so you can take another report quickly. You don't have to go back into the form. It also has an offline mode. If you're in an area that doesn't have good internet service, you can use this kiosk mode offline and it will just store everything until you're able to get to a place with Wi-Fi or data coverage, and then you can upload it. So this is how you access JotForm. And again, we'll send all of this information to you with the materials. You would want to go to this bit.ly website. You can jot this down or we'll just send it out to you. But basically you go in, you go to the website, you have to request access to that specific form. So this will take you not just to JotForm, but to our specific reporting form. You need to request access to the form, and then you'll need to make an account with JotForm. And it's really easy. It takes just a couple minutes, and then you'll be all set to go. So again, I've mentioned a few times that we will be sending you out some information. All volunteers will receive electronic poll monitor packets that include EP, frequently asked questions, top issues, all of the hotline numbers, command center contact numbers, the websites for the Department of State, so that you can help voters look at voter registration and polling place information, and all of these and instructions on how to download JotForm. So I have a real quick video and hopefully the sound will play. If not, let me know. Sorry.
Hello and welcome to the JotForm training. Today you'll learn how to get access to your state's field reporting form, how to set up and log into your JotForm account, and how to fill out a report on JotForm. We use JotForm to ensure the State Command Center can respond to issues you identify on the ground in real time. First, you'll need to access your state's reporting form. Your state trainer will either provide you with a link to enter into your browser, or they'll send you an email to sign up with JotForm directly. If your trainer gives you a sign-up link during your training, enter it into your preferred web browser. Here, you'll click Create an Account to create a secure login. You'll create a JotForm account as a cybersecurity measure to protect and secure private voter information you may be collecting in the field. After you've created your login, you'll receive an email asking you to verify your account. Click Verify Your Email to begin using your JotForm. Once you've verified your account, you can log in on your web browser on your mobile device. You'll be able to access your state's form with that same link that you signed up with. If you'd prefer to use the JotForm app, you'll need to go to your phone's app store to download JotForm. After downloading the JotForm app, you'll want to log into the secure Common Cause portal. First, you'll open the app, you'll click Login, and you'll look down at the bottom to where it says Switch to JotForm Enterprise. You'll enter in Common Cause, and then you'll log in normally. Once you've logged into the app, your state's form should appear on your JotForm app home screen. Your state trainer should provide you with specific instructions as programs vary by region. For now, let's walk through a template incident report. First, let's click on the form that we want to fill out. Let's enter our name first. Then we're going to enter our polling place address. Here you can look up the address location by entering the name of the location you are at, such as a library, school, or you can click on the blue button which will auto-locate where you are in that exact moment, as long as you've enabled the JotForm app to be able to search where you are. Let's go ahead and make an incident report. Again, each state's programs vary, so this might not look exactly the same in your state. First, we'll want to enter the name of the voter who's experiencing an issue at the polls. Then we'll ask the voter if they would be willing to share their phone number so that we can follow up with them at a later time. Then we'll want to identify exactly what problem that voter is experiencing. Let's say Dr. Watson is having some problems with the technology at the polling place, and he's also a little bit nervous about the health and safety at his polling place. Dr. Watson also had some trouble with his voting machine, as well as when he was being checked in. He was generally worried about COVID-19, so we're going to go ahead and put that in. Then you're going to let your state team know whether or not Dr. Watson needs a follow-up call to make sure that his issue is resolved. Next, you'll be able to type in any details you'd like to include in this particular report. You'll then be prompted for an opportunity to upload audio or photo attachments. You'll be able to record an audio note here, either describing the incident or allowing the voter to testify themselves. Then you'll be prompted whether you'd like to upload or take a photo to accompany this report. Finally, you'll hit the submit button to ensure that your report goes to the state lead team. After submitting, your form will reload back to the start. Your state leads will contact you if any action needs taken or if they have follow-up questions. Thanks so much for staying tuned.
Okay. I love the music at the beginning of that. It is so cheerful. Hopefully that gives you a pretty good overview of how JotForm is used. Our forms are essentially the same as the template, so that video there will basically show you exactly what you need to do to use JotForm for us. So it's really important that you as a poll monitor report as much data as possible to the command centers and encourage voters who are having problems to do the same. This data is used in many ways to create a more positive voting experience. And the data gathered in the OVL, the Our Vote Live, which is our system, helps the election protection leadership identify and address voting trends. For example, during the June primary in 2020 in Penn Hills in Allegheny County, voters sat in their vehicles gridlocked to enter the polling place's parking lot. And this problematic wait time and access issues were flagged on social media. So we have the social media monitors and rovers reporting in on this. We deployed some more rovers to the polling location to observe and document. And at the end of the day, it was actually a roving poll monitor who helped provide the testimony that got a court to extend the voting time in Penn Hills by an hour to accommodate all of those voters trying just to get into the parking lot, not even just get in line for the polling place. So it's very important to include as much information as possible, but there are a few things that are particularly important. We obviously need the info on the polling place so we know where the issue is occurring and where to deploy our resources. And it helps us identify, again, those trends that might be, in one particular county or even just one particular precinct might be, like a habitual problem. It's important that we know that. We need to know the details about the problem being reported or observed by you. How many voting machines are down? How long has the power been out, which has happened before? How many people, you can estimate how many people are in a long line, for example. If your report is coming from an interaction with a voter, it is really helpful to know the voter's name and contact information so that we can follow up and ensure that their issues are resolved. And sometimes folks don't want to leave their information, and that is fine, but try to get as much information as you can. And if possible, get information relevant to the issue you're reporting, like the voter's race, age, and disability, if it's relevant to the issue. Race is very tricky. It's one of the factors that courts look at in determining if an electoral practice is unconstitutional. So it is important that we build a record of who is being affected by various election laws and practices in their communities. Field volunteers can take your best guess at a voter's race. You don't have to ask a voter what their race is. Just take a guess. You don't need to have an uncomfortable conversation. So, for example, this billboard in this slide right here is an example of voter intimidation. They were placed in Black and Brown communities in Ohio in 2012. And the EP Coalition in Ohio documented this targeting, and the coalition started a petition that eventually got Clear Channel to take the billboards down. Excuse me one moment. Sorry about that. My allergies are getting the best of me today. So when you're planning for your shift, there are some things you want to keep in mind. Your shifts are on average 3 hours. Some voters sign up for back-to-back shifts. We are perfectly happy with that. So, but make sure you're taking care of yourself and that you're prepared for a long time of standing and also potential boredom. Sometimes things happen in a cluster and then the rest of the day it's nice and quiet. So just be prepared for that. You'll want to bring your volunteer swag, your election protection t-shirt and button. If you didn't want one of those, you can download and print an official election protection badge. Wear a bright color shirt and be sure to introduce yourself to folks as an election protection homeowner. If you are putting out yard signs, make sure you bring those with you. If you speak other languages, make sure you have a little name tag or something that says, that indicates that you can speak a language other than English. Do not wear political hats, shirts, or pins during your shift. You can do that afterwards, but while you are a poll monitor, you do not want to have anything political. Sorry about that. Again, we are nonpartisan, and while we are performing our duties, we want to make sure that we are completely neutral and we are there to serve all voters. You also want to bring with you any training resources, the FAQ sheet, the top issues sheet, the command center numbers, the information to contact the Department of State for looking up voter registration information. If you prefer to use hard copies of the forms, you'll want to print those and bring those with you for the checklist and the tally sheet. Make sure you dress appropriately for the weather. And, you know, I guess this spring, it's anybody's guess what the weather is going to be like on May 17th. But, you know, just check the weather a few days ahead of time. Make sure you're dressed appropriately. If it's going to rain, bring a raincoat or something. You know, we've had issues with, you know, snow and sleet. We have had issues in my county. We had an issue of tornadoes. So we highly recommend that if that's an issue, don't go out to your polling place. If there's any kind of severe weather, it is perfectly okay to not go out to your polling place. But if it's just going to be a little rainy, you know, just bring a raincoat or something to keep you dry. And again, prepare to be bored. There may be long stretches where you don't see anything, and that's normal. That's actually encouraging. If nothing's going on in a polling place, that's good. It means that everybody is able to cast their ballots. But you know, we want to make sure that we're there in case something goes wrong. You can bring a folding chair. You can bring snacks. If you need to take a break, you are absolutely allowed to do that. You are not, you know. We do not expect you to just stand there and make yourself uncomfortable until the end of your shift. If you need to take care of something, go take care of it. And if you are, if you so choose, you can bring your protective equipment like masks and hand sanitizer. And also, don't forget your phone charger. I am notorious for forgetting my phone charger for things like this. So you'll be out there for a couple hours. Make sure you have a phone charger and you know where you can plug in your phone. So there are some questions we get about what you can do as a poll monitor. So first one is, can I volunteer with other organizations, parties, or campaigns? And the answer to this is somewhat. You may want to volunteer with any group that you like, but while you are acting as a poll monitor, we don't want you to be promoting any other groups. We just want you to remain neutral as a poll monitor. If you want to stay for a second shift, we are absolutely on board with that. If you drove by a poll site, you want to go for an impromptu shift, absolutely. If you have a friend who's got a later shift and you want to go hang out with them, absolutely, that is fine. You will still be able to fill out the tally sheets and the incident reporting forms on JotForm. And after you finish, you can just contact me and let me know where you were so that we know where your information is coming from. You can vote during your shift if you're serving in your own polling place, but make sure you just cover up your election protection clothing while you're voting. After you're done, you can, you know, have your t-shirt on and make sure everybody knows who you are, but while you're voting, just cover that. You may not ask anybody how they voted or give them suggestions on who to vote for. You know, again, we're nonpartisan and we don't expect any of our poll monitors would do this, but we do want to make sure that it is perfectly clear that you know, do not have these conversations with voters. Even if they want to have them with you, just politely excuse yourself from that conversation. Again, don't distribute partisan material. This is not the time to circulate petitions. And do not challenge a voter's eligibility to vote. This is a tricky situation because if you do suspect somebody is ineligible to vote, we just encourage you, the first thing to do is call the hotline. There's specific ways that you can, specific people who can challenge a voter's eligibility to vote and ways to do that. Do not get involved in that. But if you see an issue, call the hotline. And most importantly, do not engage in confrontation with voters from other groups. With volunteers from other groups. There are going to be a lot of people, probably more in the general election than the primary, but there still may be people out there. They'll be handing out literature, hopefully outside of the electioneering zone. you can talk to them, you can have conversations with them, but don't have political conversations with them and don't get into confrontations with them. If you feel uncomfortable, if someone directly confronts you or makes you feel unsafe, leave. Absolutely leave. Again, your safety is the most important thing. We do not want anybody to put themselves in any kind of danger. If you feel uncomfortable, leave and then call in to the command center. So again, the election protection team is here to help voters and to help you help voters. So if you have any major issues, if a poll monitor or a poll worker asks you to leave, you can call me or you can call into the hotline to get guidance on what to do. Basically, you're allowed to be there. They can't ask you to leave, but they can ask you to get out of the electioneering zone. If you are asked questions you don't know the answer to, or you feel unsafe in any way, call us. Call into the hotline, or we'll give you the number to call me directly. Reminder that we are nonpartisan. You are a trained volunteer, not a legal expert. Voters are not clients. You are just there to help. So if they need that kind of help, that is what the hotline is for. You are our eyes and ears at the polls. So if you're comfortable taking photos and you can do so in a way that doesn't make people feel intimidated or threatened, you can do that. But be respectful of people's, their space. Don't take pictures of people who clearly don't want to have their picture taken. And then be polite. Don't get into arguments. Don't engage in threatening or harassing behavior. Again, just call the hotline. And never answer questions that you've not been trained to answer. Again, I'll say it 1,000 times, call the hotline. If you're not sure of the answer to a question, call the hotline. I'm going to pause here for questions.
And if you want to take yourself off mute and ask a question, please do so. Or you can type it into the Q&A.
Hi, it's Peter.
Go ahead, Peter.
I moved here from another state that has different restrictions on electioneering and that sort of thing. You refer to a 10-foot line. Can you explain the 10-foot line?
Sure. The 10 feet is from the door of the room where the voting is taking place. So if it's inside a building and it's in a particular room, the electioneering zone is 10 feet from that door. That means nobody can be handing out political literature. You shouldn't be talking to voters. Voters can wear campaign buttons and t-shirts and things like that, but anybody else who's not actively voting should not be within that 10-foot area. And if the line to vote extends beyond that 10 feet, then the 10 feet also applies to the line of voters waiting to get in. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it's pretty crazy, but
yeah, when I was doing it.
I understand your answer. I came from New York, and I think it's 100 feet in New York, and you don't. I was surprised. I voted in November, and I saw all sorts of political signs out in the parking lot. I was like, "Wow, you don't see this in New York." So just that last part. Somebody is online waiting to vote, but beyond this 10-foot restriction, they're still subject to non-campaigning. You can't campaign with someone who's standing on the line.
Right. And we actually, as poll monitors, should not talk to anybody yet who is in line waiting to vote. So that 10-foot radius extends as far as the line goes.
Okay, but we could stand 5 or 10 feet away from the line with our election protection t-shirts and happy to answer questions.
Absolutely, yep. Yeah, I actually had to double check that information when I was going over my notes for this to make sure that it was 10 feet and not a typo, because I thought that was a little short, but that's what it is in Pennsylvania, so. All right, any other questions? Okay, we'll go ahead and move on. And we'll have another place for questions in a little bit. So in this last section, we're going to review some of the common scenarios and responses to them. This is not a complete list of situations you may encounter, but it is a good overview of common problems and will help you know what to do. So the most common questions we get, by far, voters asking where their polling place is or asking for help checking their voter registration status, those are by far the most calls we get. Those are easily looked up on the vote.pa.gov website. We'll give you those links. You just need the voter to put in their information and it will tell them whether or not they are registered and where they are to go to vote. A lot of times if a voter knows that they're registered to vote, but they're not allowed to vote, it's because they're in the wrong polling place. Another fairly common problem is voting machines not working properly. Now this will vary county to county because some counties only use paper ballots and they'll have one ADA compliant machine, that is a machine for voters with disabilities to use, but otherwise they just use pen and paper. But others use a ballot marking device, which is the machine that you go and you touch the screen and to select your candidates. So it really depends, but especially in 2020, we had a lot of calls about machines because they were brand new. The governor had signed a order that counties had to replace all of their voting machines in 2019 in place for the 2020 election. So even some poll workers didn't know how to operate them, or some just malfunctioned. They were programmed wrong. The scanners weren't reading the paper correctly. So we do get quite a bit of calls about voting equipment failures. Another fairly common problem is ballot shortages, and I mentioned this at the beginning of the program. These issues need to be called in as soon as a polling place starts running low. So keep your ear out. If you hear people talking about, they don't seem to have a lot of ballots, or they don't seem to know what to do with the ballots, call it in so that we can contact the county and make sure that they are responding, that they know about the problem and they're ready to respond. They typically will employ rovers that will go to different polling places to make sure that they have materials, but we always like to make sure. So call those in. Oh, sorry. And that, again, may be a bigger problem this year because of the supply chain issues. So it's going to be a bit tricky, but again, as soon as you hear of a problem, call it in. Voter ID is another issue we get a lot. A lot of people are confused about what the voter ID law says, and I'll get into more detail about this. But typically, if you have voted in your precinct before, you do not need to show voter ID. And if you haven't, there are specific IDs that you can use. Unfortunately, there are some poll workers in some jurisdictions that like to interpret the law the way they think it should be written. So they will ask every voter for ID, and then we have to go out and respond to this. So if you hear of a lot of people being asked for voter ID, call that in. Language accessibility is an increasing problem in PA because we are becoming more diverse. We have a lot more people who speak languages other than English who are voters. We have those 3 counties that are required by the Federal Voting Rights Act to provide assistance in Spanish, and Philadelphia also in Chinese, and sometimes they don't. In my own county in Berks, there was an issue with them not providing in-language assistance. So that is something you want to watch out for. Disability access is a problem, especially in places like Philadelphia and Allegheny, because the polling places there are located in older venues that were constructed long before the Americans with Disabilities Act. So that can be an issue, and there are ways that we can help voters who are having trouble accessing the polling place. And then a problem that is becoming more and more frequent, I'm sure many of you have heard, is voter intimidation and electioneering. This is people misbehaving at the polling place, trying to discourage people from voting or trying to sway their vote one way or the other inside that electioneering zone. So these are the things you want to report through the incident reporting form right away. Polling places opening late or closing early. This is something you want to observe, especially if you're either on the first shift or on the last shift. Know what time the polling place opens or closes. That is important for us to know. Go through your checklist on JotForm, take notes of anything that doesn't seem right. Listen for reports of not enough poll workers. This might actually be a big problem, especially in the general election. A lot of poll workers don't want to do it anymore. The contentious atmosphere that they are operating in and the nastiness that is being directed toward poll workers is taking a toll. And a lot of counties are having a hard time recruiting enough poll workers. If you are at a polling place and you hear reports that there are fewer than 3, 3 is the bare minimum. They should be 5, but at bare minimum, there should be at least 3, and one of them should be the judge of elections. If they don't have 3 poll workers or they don't have a judge of elections, that needs to be reported immediately, because then we can work with the county to see if we can resolve that. Observe and report long lines. If you hear of poll workers giving incorrect information, for example, with the new mail-in ballots, there is a way to surrender that ballot. If this happened in 2020, there was a way to surrender that ballot and vote on a machine, but a lot of poll workers did not know that, so they were forcing people to vote on provisional ballots. So if you're hearing that poll workers are either, you want to give them the benefit of the doubt, they're just giving incorrect information because they don't know the right answer, call that in. And that way we can respond, we may be able to direct you or somebody else to help the poll workers understand what they should be doing. If voters are asked for ID when not required, as I mentioned before, sometimes it's an innocent mistake, sometimes it's less than an innocent mistake, but we need to know what's going on. If the voting machines are not working, if more than 50% of the voting machines break down, polling places are required to provide an emergency backup paper ballot, but sometimes they don't know that. So if those machines go down, call the hotline, report it in, and we will direct you or send somebody out to address that. If you hear of a large number of people being challenged, that can indicate a concerted effort to disenfranchise people. That should be called in immediately so that we can investigate it. Same thing with voter intimidation or a police presence. Police are not supposed to be at the polling places. And if you see police officers at your polling place, that could indicate a problem. They're not to be within 100 feet of a polling place unless they are called by the judge of election. So if you see a police presence at a polling place, call it in and we will investigate it. If you hear of a lot of voters being given provisional ballots, call it in because that may indicate that something strange happened with the voter registration files. And accessibility, if you see that there's not adequate handicap parking or ramps for folks who use mobility assisting devices to get into the polling place, call that in. We may need to address that further. So again, the 2 most common questions you receive are, am I registered to vote and am I at the right polling place? So if a voter has questions regarding their polling place, you should first verify that they are in fact registered using the Department of State lookup tool. Again, send you those links. In many cases, this is your key first step to getting to the root of the problem, because if they're not registered, it really doesn't matter what polling place they're at. So typically there's 3 scenarios. One is they are registered and they are at the correct polling place. That's not very frequent, but it does happen. One is that they are registered, but they are at the wrong polling place. That one is the most frequent. And the other is that they're just not registered, which is also unfortunately frequent. So the Department of State website shows that the voter is registered and at the correct polling place. Call the hotline for further instructions. It just may be there was a printing error and they don't have the right sheet in the poll book, or it could be a couple of things, but call the hotline and they will talk to the voter and possibly the poll workers to find out what's going on. If they are registered to vote, but they're in the wrong place, help them find their polling place, use the Department of State lookup tool, get them to the right polling place. Sometimes people forget to update their registration address when they move. In that case, they can still go back to their, if they moved within the state of Pennsylvania, they can still go back to their old polling place and vote one more time. But, you know, I had a friend who, you know, she lived in Chester County and she used to live in Erie. She's not going to drive all the way to Erie to cast her vote. So just help them look up their voter registration, the residents on their voter registration at the Department of State website, confirm their polling place location. If they're in the wrong place and it's too far for them to travel, call into the hotline for further instructions. If you can't resolve the problem by looking it up, call the hotline. This happened in the primary in 2020 when the polling places had to be consolidated. This was very tricky because of the COVID-19 crisis. A lot of polling places got consolidated and voters really didn't have any idea where to go. So we did answer a lot of questions about, you know, where do I go? But it can also happen after redistricting, which just happened for us because precincts sometimes need to be used, and people who've been voting in the same place for 10 years show up at, you know, their local fire department and all of a sudden it's not a polling place anymore. They may need help finding their polling place. And of course, there's always the possibility that the voter isn't registered properly, in which case there really aren't many options. They may have registered too late. Their registration may have been rejected by the county, or they were registered before but haven't voted in a long time and were removed from the rolls. So if a voter truly believes they are legitimately registered, have them call the hotline. Voting machines break. They break a lot. That is something that we expect perennially. We are just going to be dealing with polling places that have broken machines. Even the new ones that the PA counties brought were already breaking, even though they were brand new. Sometimes it's a matter of the wrong machine has been delivered. Sometimes their ballots are printed on the wrong paper. These things happened in 2020 and 2019. But whatever the reason, broken machines can cause long lines and voter frustration. It can cause voters to leave without successfully voting. So if you hear of machines breaking down and you see long lines, call them in or use the incident reporting phone. And another related issue is, again, those emergency backup paper ballots. If those machines go down, people should be given basically paper ballots to complete. And if they're not, that indicates that there's a problem in training because the poll workers don't know that that's supposed to happen. So again, if that information gets to the command center, we can respond by contacting the county or sending somebody out to help. Now, I mentioned voter ID earlier in the presentation. Voter ID is a contentious issue in Pennsylvania. There have been those reports of poll workers demanding ID even when they know they're not supposed to. It's unfortunate, but it does happen. Pennsylvania does not have a photo voter ID requirement. The only requirement is that you have to show ID the first time you vote in your precinct. So if you moved, you have to show ID the first time you vote in your new polling place. If you just registered to vote, you have to show ID. With polling places, if they moved because of redistricting, you do not have to show ID if you voted in that district before. Okay, the physical location isn't the issue, it's the precinct. So if you are a first-time voter or a first-time voter in your precinct, you will need to show a valid form of photo ID, which would be a driver's license or a PennDOT card, any ID issued with a photo on it from a Commonwealth agency or the US government, a passport, an armed forces ID, and student IDs and employer IDs are accepted. There are also valid forms of non-photo ID, which would be the voter registration confirmation card sent by your county election office, a current utility bill, a current bank statement or paycheck, although those are a little harder to come by now. A lot of people don't get paper paychecks anymore. Government checks, non-photo IDs issued by the Commonwealth or by the US government, or a firearm. So you don't have to memorize all of these. Just, understand that first-time voters will need to show some form of ID, and if they're not sure what kind, have them call the hotline, and the volunteers there will help guide them to what forms of ID they will need. So in an ideal world, all polling places would be accessible to all voters, regardless of age or disability, but unfortunately they're not. Many polling places are located in those buildings that were constructed before construction standards were in place to make sure they were accessible. So it can be difficult to find locations for polling places that are accessible for people who use mobility assistance devices. So when you arrive at your polling place, you want to look for things like ramps, wide doorways, and handicap parking. If you don't see any of those, or they're blocked, somebody parked a truck in front of the handicap parking spot, or you see a voter experiencing trouble, call it into the hotline. And if a voter is, in a wheelchair or something, needs assistance, ask them first if they need help, and then provide that help if they say yes. That's just a good practice in general to be in. If you see a voter with a disability, ask them if they need help before you jump in to help them. Every polling place must have an ADA compliant voting machine available for voters with disabilities to use if they so choose, even if the county only uses paper ballots. So if there's an issue with the ADA compliant voting machine, it breaks down or they ran out of paper for it, it needs to be reported to the command center immediately so we can reach out to the county to make sure it's getting fixed or replaced. So if a voter with a disability has any trouble casting their ballot, call the hotline. Voters with disabilities and voters with limited English proficiency are permitted to have an assister of choice in the voting room. And this has become a problem in recent years because some poll workers don't know this. Federal law requires that voters with limited English proficiency are permitted to have any assister they want in the voting booth with them to translate. For voters with disabilities, the first time they have someone help them, they'll be asked to complete a declaration of need of assistance, and this will be noted on the voter's record for future elections. But in general, they are permitted to have anybody they so choose to help them vote. And if they report that they are denied that right, it is time to call the hotline or report it on your incident report. Going back to the electioneering, you'll see a sign similar to this red, white, and blue sign. Electioneering beyond this point is prohibited by law. You want to stay out of that zone. If you see somebody within that zone and they are trying to give voters pamphlets or something, or talking to them in line about candidates, that is something you may want to call into the hotline. They may just be having a conversation. Don't walk on the eavesdrop, but if you notice this or you hear people talking about this, call it into the hotline. This was a question a few years ago. Voters in Pennsylvania are permitted to wear political hats, shirts, buttons, etc. while they are in line and while they are voting. But as with any other voter, once they have voted, they must immediately leave the electioneering zone. They cannot hang out and talk to the poll workers or other voters. They must leave that 10-foot area. Poll workers are not allowed to display any political clothing or merchandise at all. And again, this is unfortunately something that does happen occasionally, but if you see this happening, you want to report that. If you see any intimidation or threats of violence, do not engage. Report immediately to the hotline in the command center. If somebody comes up to you and is a little animated and talking to you, use your judgment on disengaging from that conversation. Sometimes people just want to be heard, but do not engage in conflict. If somebody is harassing or threatening you and you feel uncomfortable, absolutely leave. We tend to discourage calling the police because, again, they're not supposed to be at the polling places, and also there are some communities that don't have a great relationship with the police, so we tend to see calling the police as a last resort, but your safety is number one. So use your judgment, get out of the situation, and call into the command center. Vote by mail, again, you'll probably get a few questions about this because it is so new and there's so much confusion and contention around it. Any registered Pennsylvania voter can vote by mail, but their application deadline is before election day, so you probably won't be dealing much with folks wanting to apply for that. But there may be people who have an unvoted ballot that they want to surrender and vote. So vote by mail is legal in Pennsylvania. The voters have until May 10th to apply for their mail ballot, and the ballots must be received by 8 p.m. on election day. So if a voter has that blank ballot, if they want to fill out the blank mail ballot, they have to return it in person to the county election office by 8 p.m. on election day. If they have voted on it, but they have not mailed it yet, they may not submit it to their polling place. Their only option is if there's a drop box to put it in the drop box or to take it right to the county election office. If they have questions about what to do, have them call the hotline and submit an incident report on JotForm. And finally, if a voter's eligibility to vote is challenged, report this to the command center. It's not the most common scenario, but it does happen, and sometimes it is a coordinated effort to disenfranchise voters or disrupt our elections. So if you see a problem outside the polling place, people, talking about, this person challenged me and I don't understand why, I've voted here for 10 years, call it in, get as much information as you can from the voter and report it on your incident reporting form. And finally, any more questions before we move on to the very final part?
So what is Pennsylvania's policies on carrying weapons, and what about at voting at the polls?
I am not 100% sure. It has been my understanding that voters are allowed to carry to the polling place, but they must immediately leave. That is definitely a question that if somebody has a concern about that, that is definitely something that you would want to call into the hotline and get their, I know they are trained to answer that.
Another issue, it's my understanding that the right to vote by absentee ballot has been struck down, but it's on appeal and stayed, and it's supposedly in place for the primary, but we're not sure about the general election. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. For the primary election, voters are able to request a mail ballot and an absentee ballot. In Pennsylvania, to treat it as two different things, even though the process is completely the same. So voters are still able to request a mail ballot or an absentee ballot and vote by mail for the primary, and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has not ruled on that challenge to Act 77 yet, so we do not know what's going to happen for the judge.
So if someone is a voter allowed to bring into the machine a piece of paper that indicates everyone they want to vote for, to help them out, specifically someone that has like learning issues or, reading is difficult, but they don't want to bring in an assistant to help them? Are they allowed to have a piece of paper in there with them?
It is my understanding that yes, you are allowed to bring any kind of voter guides, or even sometimes parties will have sample ballots. It was my understanding, yes. But again, if you're unsure, I would definitely call the hotline. They're legal volunteers, so they are trained better in the law than I am. Yeah, I would call the hotline.
So in theory, just playing this out, so if the poll worker says, oh, no, you can't bring that piece of paper in with you, and then the voter leaves frustrated saying, yeah, they didn't, then I would say, well, you can call the hotline to report this.
Yes, absolutely. That would absolutely be what you want to do.
Thank you. And then the other thing is, I'm sorry, because I don't know if you saw in the chat, I'm actually going to be a poll worker for the first time this year. I just was informed, so I'm learning that training too. But I wanted to be refreshed on this, having done this, the last election. And now I'm forgetting my question. It was about the poll worker, because a couple times you've said, they may be innocently not knowing this, and I'm thinking I may not know a lot of things. It's my first time. It indicates on the rolls like this person is a first time and needs to show their ID because they're newly registered. Like it says it in the books, right?
Yes, it does.
Okay, thanks. So there should be no ambiguity.
I was a poll worker before too, so thank you for volunteering to do that. It is direly needed.
Well, thank you for this. This is really helpful because it kind of goes hand in, glove with the other side of it. This is very helpful to be refreshed on this. Thank you.
Great. I'm glad it was useful to you. Okay, if there's no further questions, I'll just wrap up here. So a reminder, always contact your lead, that would be me, if you have any need of immediate assistance or you have any questions. Remember that we are nonpartisan. We help all voters. Be observant, report anything that you see that or hear that seems wrong. Be respectful of voters, be respectful of other volunteers. They may be of a different political party than you, but they are there as part of the political process. Just be respectful of others. Make sure to bring any PPE that you would feel comfortable with and your comfort items with you. And when in doubt, call the hotline. And if there's no other questions.
So you're going to be sending us these materials? Is that you're mailing them to us?
Yeah, we're going to email the presentation and a few other documents that we provide to poll monitors to help give them the information they need for election day.
And the T-shirt?
Yep. If you've provided me with the size of your T-shirt, I will be sending that along. We are still working out the logistics of how to get that out to everybody, but we will let you know as soon as we figure it out. Okay, it looks like we are right on time. So if there are no other questions, I will bid you a good afternoon. And if you do have any other questions, you can always contact me at jgreen@commoncause.org. Don't forget the E on the end of green. That's usually what happens if I don't get the email. So everybody have a great afternoon. Pinky, you just asked a question and I answered the wrong way. Yes, we will email those out to you.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I'll see you next time.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, Scott, I'm going to go ahead and hop out then. Thanks so much for your help.